Hey, what's up everybody? This is Josh Burkman, and this is my story. So I've been a professional fighter for 17 years. I've had 48 professional fights, and the majority of those fights were wins. I've been a top 10 fighter in the world multiple times. I hung out in the top 20 for 15 years of my career. I was driving from southern Utah back home to Salt Lake, and I heard it was an advertisement on the radio. It said, if you think you're the toughest guy in Utah, come down and prove it. And I was like, what? Really? They're gonna let people fight and not get in trouble? And about 3 minutes later, my buddy Charlie Johnson called me up and he goes, man, I just heard this thing and it's meant for you, Burkman. And I was like, yeah, was it the article saying they had NHB fights downtown? He's like, yeah. He's like, I wrote the number down for you. So I wrote the number down, and I called it a few minutes later. This was a Thursday. I called them up and I said, hey, I hear you're having fights downtown. I'd like to fight. And they said, where do you train at? I'm like, well, I don't train, but I'm in good shape. I'm a football player. I'd like to make a little bit of money before the school year starts. And so that's kind of what happened. They said, well, we don't have anybody for you to fight except for a guy that's 9-0, and his name's Hank Weiss. He won the last tournament. I said, how much does he weigh? They said 195 pounds. I said, perfect. I have 2 legs, he has 2 arms, 2 legs, I'll fight him. And that was the beginning. I showed up to fight on Saturday, and I thought for sure I was gonna beat this dude. By this point, I had been in 150 street fights. I'd never had a black eye, I had never lost. And anybody that's my friend from Cottonwood, Dixie, or Snow College knows that that's the truth. And that seems to be that was my amateur career. Because that Saturday, I got in the cage. I wasn't too nervous. I wasn't, and I had wrestling shoes on. I had soccer shorts on. I did not look like what we look like today in the cage. I had to go fight this guy. I came out, threw a big right hand, picked him up, slammed him on the ground. As soon as I slammed him, he had my arm like this, and it was getting hyperextended, and I was like, I'm out. So I lost my first fight that I had ever had. And then I laid there after I tapped out for a minute, and I just couldn't help but smile and be happy, because it was the greatest, most fun thing that I'd ever done in my entire life. And then I went backstage and I laid on the ground and I said, I want to do this forever. Like, this is what I'm meant to do, is be a professional fighter. And a week later, I called up Chris Hill. I thought about it for a while. I dropped out of school. I gave up my scholarship, and I decided I didn't want to pursue football anymore. I wanted to pursue ultimate fighting. This is the first phase, and kind of the second phase of me as turning from a fighter into a martial artist. So my first stint in the UFC was really me understanding turning from a fighter to a martial artist, not just being physical and mental, but being spiritual. And so what I would do is I would take 9 weeks and I would train for a fight. And I would get in peak performance physically, mentally, spiritually, where I could almost create reality. I would be thinking about my mom, and she would call me back 5 minutes later, and I'd be like, whoa, and I would become so aware and so conscious that all my senses were vibrant and alive as I got ready for those fights. And then when I got done with the fight, it was instantly the opposite. It was everything that I had just worked to build. Being so aware, being so sensitive, I destroyed it instantly by going to the clubs, drinking, partying, and I would do it for like a month. I would live in the hotels in Vegas. I would live in hotels in LA. We would travel to Costa Rica, Spain. I mean, we lived it up, and we indulged. And then the matchmaker, Joe Silva, would call me back up, and he'd be like, Burkman, you ready to fight? And I'd be like, yeah. And I'd have to get on a flight, come home, 9-week training camp. And it almost worked like clockwork for me, In 2009, I fought a guy. I started to have more back problems, more neck problems, and I just thought, I'll get better. I'll be all right. Fight through it, be tough. And I picked a guy named Dustin Haslop, and I slammed him on the mat. And as soon as I slammed him on the mat, my arm went numb, my shoulder went numb, and I thought I had paralyzed myself. And I sat there for 10 seconds. And in the fight, Joe Rogan's going, I can't believe Burkman's so flexible. And I was like, now looking back, I'm not flexible. It was numb. I couldn't feel it. This guy's putting me through all these kind of arm bars. And I ended up getting out of it. And then I put it on him for a little while because I had recovered. And after that, he ended up catching me in a submission. And I knew right then that like I needed to take a break. So again, I started partying and screwing around again. And I went out and I stayed in LA for a while. And when I was out there, I called the matchmaker, Joe Silva. And I told him I needed to take time off. I had a hurt neck. I needed to get an x-ray. And when they did that, they ended up, he called me. He's like, hey, you got one more fight on your contract. Do you want to take the fight? And I was like, yeah, I'll take the fight. They were big paychecks. They were nice paychecks. I was like, I'll fight anybody for that kind of money. And so I took the fight. I didn't train for the fight, and I was really, really injured. And after the fight, I got an MRI on my neck, and the surgeon, I went to 3 surgeons. 2 of them told me I needed surgery. They needed to fuse the discs in my neck. One surgeon was a lady named Dr. Basharan, Rhonda Basharan, and she owns she's the founder of the Institute of Sports Science in Nevada. And she told me, she said, you can heal your neck. You don't have to get surgery. And if you heal your neck this way, you can get your career back. The other doctors, and again, this is in 2009, told me I needed surgery, I needed a fusion, and that my career was over. So I went home and I prayed about it, and it was probably one of the most honest prayers I'd said in my life. And it was probably 30 minutes long, and I said, I know that I haven't necessarily been living my life the right way, that I would like my career back, and I'm willing to do anything that I need to do to get that. And Buddy Dre showed up and he said, hey, I know a lady that wants to help you. And she came to me and she said, this is what you're gonna have to do. You're gonna have to get on a raw food diet. You're going to have to quit drinking alcohol. You're gonna have to do yoga. And if you do that, she explained to me all the way that the nerves and the vertebrae and everything works. And she told me that I could get my career back. But what they did is they said, so there's a VO2 max, and your VO2 max is basically the energy level your body runs off. So when you take a breath in and a breath out, you take in oxygen and you take it out, and then they measure that, and then they measure the blood that pumps between each beat of your heart. So the combination of those 2 things is the energy level your system runs off, and it gives you a number. My number was about 161 when I started. It's a hard number to increase, right? So we got that up to 167. And then the last probably 2 months of my training, where we were really like getting into some deep physical, mental, psychological work, they said, we're gonna peak. We're gonna peak like you're training for a fight, but you're peaking to like save your career and your life. And I was like, okay. And I took it really, really serious. And I took my VO2 max up to 172. That's where and it was the second highest that they had ever tested. And they said, Josh, you're in NASCAR, and you want to be in NASCAR and you want to compete against other NASCARs. And if you want to do that and feel great and be great, then you need to start to treat yourself like that. And I was like, I get it. And then they said, we want you to go out and drink alcohol tonight. And I was like, wait a minute. You guys give me this big talk that I'm a NASCAR, that I haven't been able to drink or do anything for 9 months. And now you're telling me to go out and drink? Okay, if this is part of the study, let's do it. And so it took me 3 weeks to go to living my life perfectly to get to 172. So to get from 169 to 172, it took me 3 weeks living very wholesomely, very righteously in the sense of like an athlete. 3 weeks to get to peak training, right? From already being in really good shape. And then they said, go out and drink. So the first night, on Friday night, I went out and I had a beer, probably had maybe a shot or 2 of tequila. And instantly I was like, oh, I don't like this. It numbed me. It didn't make me feel good, where I was so sensitive. And then I went out on Saturday night. And 2, when you go out on the strip in Vegas, or you go out, it's not like, oh, I'm going to go out at like 11. You go out and you're out till 4 o'clock in the morning. So during this, I was also going to sleep at 11 o'clock. I was waking up at 8 o'clock and I was taking a half hour nap every day. So the time that I was resting and stuff was really important. And they said that the body rests and gets the best REM sleep from 11 to 4 a.m. So it was important to be asleep during that time. And now I was going out at 11, getting home at 4 in the morning, Friday night. Saturday I went out, and now I was like a little more numb. So I was like, oh, I might as well have 5 shots of tequila and 5 beers. And then I got home again at like 4 o'clock in the morning. And when I got home, went to sleep. Sunday I recovered, went to yoga, and Monday I went in to do my tests. And this is the part of the story that I feel like is one of the most important lessons in my life, and I tell it to a lot of young kids, and I tell it to my athletes, is just from that weekend of drinking and not sleeping, I went from 172 to 169. I lost three numbers off of my peak training, off of my VO2 max. And it took me 3 weeks to get that peak training. And it took me 2 nights of not sleeping and going out to lose that peak performance. And then they told me what alcohol does to your body. They said, Josh, do you know how they pull essential oils out of flowers and out of herbs? They do it with alcohol. When you put alcohol in it, it separates the essential oil from the rest, and it floats to the top, and then they get it pulled out, and they're like, it does no difference to your body. It pulls, so the nucleus in the spine and the life force that resides in the belly, like alcohol depletes and messes with those essential fluids that are in our body. They said, as you're trying to be a peak performance and peak athlete, like the first thing that it does is it pulls those essential fluids that the human needs from your brain and from your spinal cord. And they were like, our study is done here. And the case study was over. And that's why I say, like, the word of wisdom and things like that, we were told certain things, and those things, like, they don't always make sense until we have to go through struggle and hardship and pain. In 2010, I came back and I didn't know whether I would be able to make it back to the UFC or not. And I did. I not only made it back to the UFC, but I became a top 10 fighter in the world again. And I fought a guy named John Fitch. And before I fought John Fitch, he was the number 3 ranked fighter in the world. Nobody had ever choked him out. And I lived my life as perfectly as I knew how to live it, from the 4 fights before that to that fight. And I would wake up in the morning and I would study, and I would prepare myself for the day. I'd visualize perfect workouts. I would visualize enjoying my family, and I would create this perfect situation. And I was eating really healthy. I was hydrating. I was training hard, and I was visualizing myself beating John Fitch in the first minute of the first round. And in my interviews leading up to that, I said, I'm going to beat this guy, and I'm going to beat him in the first minute of the first round. And I repeated it over and over to everybody that would listen, to every camera, every interview. And I went out and I fought John Fitch. And when we got in the cage, I looked at him, and I knew I was going to win, and he knew I was going to win. And I knew that he was nervous, and I knew that he was scared, and I wasn't, because I had prepared for it mentally, physically, spiritually. In every way, I was ready to go. And we went out. He chased me around the ring for a minute, and I hit him with a couple shots. He shot in. I choked him, and the referee didn't even stop the fight. I stood up over the top of him, put my hand up, and it was the greatest moment of my career, not because of the victory, because of what I overcame, that my career was over, that it was taken away from me, that I was going to have all these resentments. John Fitch beat me up in 2007 worse than anybody had ever beat me up. In 2014, I beat him in 41 seconds and was the first one to ever choke him out, because I didn't ever give up. I kept going, and I did it all the right way. My story is a story of hope. You know, what I do is I teach people about martial arts. I teach people about yoga, but I just use martial arts and yoga and those things to teach people about breath and posture and movement, because that's what we need. That's what is going to heal, and that's what martial arts is about. It's not just physical, and it's not just mental. You know, it's a spiritual process, right? It's a process of being able to walk from dark to light. There's a quote from the Dalai Lama that I use a lot, right? And it's that we're here for 99, 100 years at the very most. And during that time, we should do something good and something useful with our lives. And if you try to add to the happiness of other people, then you'll truly understand the reason for being here.